From hidden Mediterranean gems to the wilderness of Antarctica, Silversea invites you to explore the world in greater depth. Venture to over 900 destinations across all 7 continents. On board small ships that set the standard for elite ocean travel, every journey opens doors to extraordinary discoveries. And wherever you sail, you can expect the same Silversea promise: unrivaled service, unmatched comfort, and unforgettable memories. Visit silversea.com to learn more.
Good morning, it's Monday, May 11, and this is the Brussels Playbook podcast. The vibe in Brussels today is fraught as the EU's foreign ministers consider whether to move forward with sanctions on several West Bank settlers. Also on the pod, I talked to the Spanish foreign minister about the need for an EU army, and French filmmakers are nervous that a far-right win in next year's French presidential election could kill their industry. I'm Zoya and with me today is our chief foreign affairs correspondent, Nick Finnicker. Hey, Nick.
Hey, Zoya.
What'd you get up to this weekend?
We call them interior Olympics. We set up little circuits, have the kids run through them, get to tucker the little ones out.
Ooh, that sounds very good. That sounds like what I sometimes have to do when I'm recording the podcast from a hotel room where I have to build a fort, Nick. I literally have to build a fort so that the echo from the hotel room air conditioning doesn't come into this recording.
Well, they'd love to help you with that because they'd love to destroy the living room at any occasion.
Perfect. It's a date. Nick, the EU's foreign ministers are meeting in Brussels today, and you're reporting on exactly what it is they're going to be talking about. And one of the main priorities is this big issue on whether EU countries should make an agreement on sanctions against so-called violent West Bank settlers.
Exactly. So this is an issue that's been boiling for months. The violence in the West Bank territories has been rising. There's been criticism from even people like German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. But the sanctions proposal has been on the table for months. And what we're hearing from diplomats is that it could move ahead today at the Foreign Affairs Council.
And the thing that we're seeing is, once again, this dividend from the Hungarian election. And one of the key reasons why those sanctions weren't moving is because Hungary was chiefly acting as a blocker. Hungary was probably one of Israel's strongest supporters in the EU, and under the Viktor Orban government, they were not allowing this sanctions package to move forward. But now that Peter Magyar is ensconced in the prime ministership, it looks like that may change.
Yeah, exactly. So on this one, we understood that there were 26 out of 27 countries in favor. You need unanimous support to pass the sanctions. Peter Magyar's government was sworn in this past weekend. So, of course, that has changed, and now the new government is issuing instructions. The big question mark here is whether the new government has issued instructions to back this thing. So Hungary is going to be represented by its ambassador, who's still from Viktor Orban's time in power. So we don't know if he's received updated instructions on the sanctions proposal.
But what you're reporting in today's playbook is that we are expecting a political agreement today, should all things line up.
Yep. Spoken to several diplomats, 4 diplomats. One of them said, I would be really surprised if this did not come to pass today. So that's a pretty good indicator.
And in terms of what these sanctions would actually look like, do you know what they're going to target if they do indeed decide to target these West Bank settlers?
So individual sanctions usually mean not allowed to travel into the EU, various restrictions related to kind of entering, visa ban essentially for these people who would be designated as being behind the violence we've seen in the West Bank territories.
And the other thing that we've been hearing about is another proposal which the French and the Swedes have been pushing, which is about imposing tariffs on goods that come from Israeli West Bank settlements as well. But what's kind of the status on that one? That's not quite ready yet, as I understand it.
Yeah, so there is a push to go much further than these West Bank sanctions. There's also been on the EU-Israel Association Agreement a proposal to suspend that. That's not going to move forward, but we do see some interest in this Franco-Swedish proposal to go after the exports, and that would be a different track because tariffs is essentially decided by the European Commission with a qualified majority of countries needed to support it. It's a lower threshold, and we're seeing some interest in that building, but unclear if there's going to be any news on that today.
Yeah. That's not the only thing up for discussion today at this Foreign Affairs Council. There's also going to be talk about the 21st package of sanctions against Russia over the war in Ukraine.
Yep. So exploratory talks, early stages, but we're already hearing some really interesting lines from diplomats about what could be in this 21st sanctions package. And more interesting is the narrative and the framing saying, Russia's looking weaker overall. We've seen battlefield setbacks. We've seen the economy in dire straits. We even saw Vladimir Putin say over the weekend he thinks the war is approaching its end. So the idea here is for the EU to make a big push in time for the summer, late June, early July, with a 21st package that would really kind of seal the deal in a way, encourage Putin to really come to the table and engage seriously with the peace proposal.
Yeah, and in terms of what's in this package that hasn't been there before, we're looking at primarily targeting that Russian shadow fleet, as I understand it. That's going to be the big push. It's these tankers that sail around the world under various flags, mysterious flags, but they're actually essentially fueling the war effort by selling various, Russian oil, et cetera, et cetera. And essentially, the EU really wants to crack down on that shadow fleet. And one of the things that they're looking at is even potentially stopping companies from being able to service that shadow fleet. So if you've got a ship that's on the shadow fleet, then you cannot refuel it, you cannot provide sort of assistance to it. If something breaks down, you can't fix it, that sort of thing. So I think that's a key measure, right?
Yep. So that's been in there. And that maritime services ban you were referring to was blocked previously by some of the more seafaring nations, Greece, Malta. But that could come back on the table. That's what we're hearing. We're also hearing about a big push against Russia's financial system, the banks, the financial institutions. We're looking at companies that support so-called stolen grain shipments. So taking grain from Ukrainian ports and bringing it to clients around the world. We saw this was the subject of a big spat between Ukraine and Israel. Israel ultimately rejected this shipment of stolen grain, but other countries are receiving it, talking about putting that in the next 21st sanctions package.
Yeah, so I think that's going to be a big one as well, because that all hits Putin's ability to fund that war effort, particularly if he's not able to sell that grain. And that grain is being stolen from parts of Ukraine that have been occupied by Russia and is now being tilled and so forth and sold on the market. So that's the plan.
Yeah. And one more thing is we will see sanctions against individuals involved in the abduction of Ukrainian children, and that will be announced after the Foreign Affairs Council with the Canadian Foreign Minister President and the EU Chief Diplomat Kaja Kallas.
Nick, that leads us very nicely onto our second story of the day, which is a conversation that I had with the Spanish Foreign Minister, José Manuel Albares, when I was in Madrid last week.
Very interesting, very much in the news.
Yeah, and he's actually in town today for this Foreign Affairs Council, so it's quite timely. And what he told me when I was chatting with him is that it is really time for the EU to get its act together and to be able to defend itself with an EU army, because he was saying that under this new Trump administration, it's pretty clear that the US is cutting the EU loose, and so the EU needs to do something about that.
Yeah, and the EU army is an interesting one, right? It kind of comes up. It's like a sea monster that surfaces every few years. People disparage it, laugh at it. But the fact that you had someone so senior as the Spanish foreign minister saying this on record is really quite significant.
Yeah, and something that Albares actually told me is that this idea is not a new one. It's actually been kicking around since, I think he said 1951. At the very outset of this EU integration program, there was this idea of like maybe we need an EU army. And in the end, it just has never had the support to get up again. His argument is, firstly, we obviously have this very aggressive Russia on the EU's borders. But secondly, the US is making it very clear that its nuclear umbrella is maybe kind of optional. He was saying, look, we actually cannot continue waking up every morning wondering what the US is going to do next. It's time for the EU to grow up.
And one of the big arguments against the EU army is that it sort of overlaps with NATO. So he addressed that. He argued that an EU army wouldn't undermine, could be complementary to NATO. And he says that, the United States have been making their armies stronger and stronger, and no one thinks that weakens NATO. If NATO is not providing any more security that was given before, then we have to do more as Europeans.
And it's kind of interesting, Nick, because this is a socialist politician. It's not the kind of thing you hear all that often from that side of the political spectrum, but he was very strong in his comments.
Absolutely. And some of the big pushes toward EU integration have been led by center-left politicians, so perhaps it's not too surprising.
Yeah, so he's putting this on the agenda. He says that it's time to actually do something more cohesive as Europe. And what he told me was that this EU army, it shouldn't replace the 27 EU armies. It should actually complement them, an extra level of protection. Because at the moment, the magic of being a member of NATO is that no one tries to test NATO because everyone thinks the US is going to come and rescue the EU. But if you don't have that kind of security blanket, then you need something else on top of that to ensure that you don't have Russia testing the borders.
Yeah, and that's hence a lot of the discussion we've had lately about Article 42.7, the mutual assistance clause in EU treaties, which has always been there as kind of dormant paragraph in the treaties, but now is being discussed, even tested at a tabletop exercise recently. But that's also controversial. Some of the more pro-NATO countries pushing back on that and saying, we don't need this.
Yeah. Nick, it's the Cannes Film Festival on Tuesday. Do you have a favorite French film?
In all of history, sure. I have fond memories of seeing La Haine as a very startled, 11-year-old in the movies.
Oh, what was it about?
It's about the suburbs, the hardscrabble suburbs, just the daily life of a couple kids kind of, eking out an existence there. It's a great movie.
I watched Fantomas dubbed into Russian when I was a kid and made a big impression on me. It was a fun action adventure. Well, we've got a story out today by our colleague Giorgio Leali. He's looking at one potential impact of the far-right National Rally potentially winning the next French presidential election. He reckons that's going to have a devastating impact on the French film industry.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating story. France subsidizes a lot of its film industry. So the idea is if you have a change in power, someone like Marine Le Pen or Jordan Bardella coming to power in 2027, they could bring seismic changes. They could start to fund movies and series that promote a different narrative that we've become used to, and kind of take over the reins of the CNC, the Centre National du Cinéma, which is really the sort of financial heart of the French audiovisual industry.
Yeah, and that's basically that CNC, the way that it funds movies, French movies, is by imposing taxes on movie theater tickets and the sale of DVDs and Blu-rays. They also tax movie and TV streaming platforms like YouTube and Netflix. And it's hugely important because it subsidizes hundreds of films, this program. It's so important, Nick, that our producer Saga has dug up some stats, and she found that of the 84 films that were submitted to the Oscars for Best International Film this year, 20 of them were supported by the CNC. So it's a big, big player in that industry.
And we should specify that the taxes are taken on foreign films. So mostly American films, big blockbusters, those revenues help to fund French cinema and the so-called cultural exception that France claims for itself.
Yeah, but National Rally says basically, well, firstly, we may start funding different films because they've criticized the sorts of films that get made, saying that they've got a left-wing agenda. But also, the French National Rally MP, Philippe Ballard, he said that people from the cinema world live in another reality. They are not aware of the financial problems of the French. So they're basically saying, these people are in la-la land. We're not going to give them any more money.
Yeah, and they're going as far as suggesting that they could just scrap the CNC altogether, which would really kind of be a bombshell change in France.
Yeah, and so people who work in the French film industry, they say that this funding actually creates loads and loads of value for the French industry, for the French market. According to an estimate, it generated 12.6 billion of value added to the economy in 2022 and employs more than 260,000 people in France, which is pretty huge. Well, let's see what happens. I think this is going to be a really significant one. That's a great story out by Giorgio this morning. Folks, that's almost it from us today. Although I would love to hear, Nick, from our listeners, because I think we can pretty safely say that our film tastes are a little limited given our choices.
Yeah, we came up with a grand total of 2. Films, one in Russian, dubbed into Russian.
Well, folks, tell us what we should be watching. Summer's coming up. I don't like sunshine. I'm just going to sit inside and watch movies. Tell us what you've got from your country or your favorite French film, whatever you're into. But actually, that reminds me, we've got a few letters from our letters. What am I talking about? They're not letters. They're WhatsApp notes, Nick, because no one writes anymore. It's a lost art. We've got some notes from our WhatsApp line. from folks who've been writing into the various questions we've had over the last month or so. So we had Jonathan from Switzerland who tells us what European identity means to him. He says, French name, UK passport, Italian mother. Being European gave me an identity until it was robbed from me 10 years ago. Solution, did my own Brexit and became Swiss.
Whoa, that took a twist. Wasn't expecting that.
Neither did I. He Brexited but to be fair, Switzerland's not in the EU, mate.
No, he self-Brexited because he didn't like the way the EU was going, I think.
This is a complicated...
Jonathan, tell us more.
Martin from the Netherlands, he does research on the topic of European identity among young people, and he reckons there's a trend. So he says that for progressives, being European is linked to values like human rights and freedom of speech. For centrists, it's practical, so it's things like paying with the euro and traveling without borders, being able to make phone calls wherever you go. And for conservatives, it's about shared history and culture. Fascinating.
Really fascinating.
All right, folks, thanks for listening. Please do rate us, review us, send us your feedback, leave us a note in our WhatsApp.
Send a letter.
I would love a letter. You know, the first person who sends me... We don't have merch on this podcast yet, but I will get merch for whoever sends me a physical letter.
There you have it.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.